Good morning, my name is Dave Hall. As you may already be able to tell, my voice is not 100% with me. I'm recording this in winter at the end of some junk. I'm sorry. Let's talk about the LSAT. Let's start with just the very basics. The LSAT is the law school admission test. Its purpose is to help law schools decide who they want to admit and who they don't. Basically, law schools feel like people who do better on the LSAT will do better in law school and will be more likely to pass the bar. And there is some reason for believing that's true. It's not a perfect indicator, but it probably is the best of the indicators that we have. So, what is the test? It is a 6-section, mostly multiple choice test. Each section is 35 minutes, so you got 3.5 hours. You'll have a break right after section 3, and you'll have an essay at the end. So, of the 6 sections on the test, only 4 of them are scored. And here's the way that works. Every single test will have 1 scored reading comprehension section. This is like the reading comprehension that you remember from the SAT or the ACT, except for probably a little harder. The scored reading comprehension section will have 3 long passages, 60 lines each, and you'll be asked 7 or 8 questions about each of those passages, and then it'll have a short set of dual passages, each about 25, 30 lines, and you'll be asked 7 or 8 questions about those 2 passages together, comparing them and contrasting them. That's the reading comprehension section. Every test also has 1 scored games section. Test writers call it analytical reasoning. We call it games because it's fun. Because the analytical reasoning section, it really gives you 4 logic puzzles. And none of the puzzles will give you enough information to solve the puzzle completely, but you will always have enough information to answer the 5 or 6 questions you'll be asked about each of those games. And finally, every test will have 2 scored logical reasoning sections. These sections give you 25 or 26 questions each about arguments. You'll have a brief argument and you'll be asked to deal with it in various ways. You'll be asked to make it stronger, to make it weaker, to identify the flaws in it. And that's the scored portion of the test. So if you were counting, you came to the conclusion that every test has 100 or 101 questions, basically. There have been a few forms with 102, a few forms that started out with 100 questions and had 1 removed. By the way, when that happens, what that means is that the people that took the test for real when it was scored did not perform in the aggregate on that question the way that the test writers anticipated them. So, for example, question 17 in the first logical reasoning section, the test writers, after testing out the question, believed that 60% of test takers would get it right. However, when they actually administered it, only 6% of test takers got it right. They removed that question from scoring. Something funky was going on. All right, so that may happen and you may get a test with only 99 questions. But if that's the scored portion, what are those other 2? Well, one of them is the experimental section, and it exists in order for the test writers to do the work I was just talking about, to make sure that their future tests are standardized in the same way that their past tests were. In order for the LSAT to be a useful tool for law schools, we have to know that your 172 in June of year 2020 means the same thing as her 172 in December of year 2018. See what I'm saying? And in order for those to mean the same thing, the test has to be standard. In order for the test to be standard, the test writers have to test out their questions. So, every time you take the LSAT, everybody who takes the LSAT will be engaged as free labor for LSAC, making sure that future tests look like past tests. So that experimental section doesn't count towards your score, and there's no way for you to know which section it is, really. Sometimes they'll be trying out a new question, and you may get an inkling of which one didn't count, but, like, what good does that do you? The major theme here is just take all the multiple choice sections as though your score depended on it. So when you sit down for the test, there will be as many as like 6 different orders of the test material with as many as 6 different experimental sections being tested just in every single testing room. So you may sit down and start with logical reasoning as your first section, while the person sitting next to you is starting with games. And you're eventually going to get that game section, and she's eventually going to get the logical reasoning section you're working on. They're offered just in different orders. But what may happen is you have 3 logical reasoning sections, in which case you know one of them didn't count. And she may have 2 reading comp sections, in which case she'd know that one of them didn't count. Same 4 scored, but you may get different experimental sections. And then at the end of the test, after you've done the 5 multiple choice section, your brain is basically mush, and all you really want to do is get to the nearest bar and drown your sorrows. You will have to endure a writing sample. It's not scored. Don't worry about it. You're going to do it. You're going to do your best, but you're not going to spend any of your mental energy worrying about it or fretting over it, or even really practicing for it, probably. It isn't scored. Okay, you can do 1 practice essay if you want. But that then altogether is the test. 6 sections, 5 multiple choice, 1 essay, only 4 sections are scored, and it's always 2 LR, 1 games, 1 reading comp. That's the LSAT basics. Let's talk about how the LSAT is scored. It's a standardized test, so we have to be able to compare the scores against other scores from the same administration and from other administrations. And the way you achieve that is by having a scaled score, not just a raw score. In other words, there are 100 questions on the test. Your score isn't reported as a 90 out of 100. Instead, your score is reported on a scale from 120 to 180. 120 is at the low end, 180 is at the high end, and happens to be my score 3 times. And the scores are basically, but not perfectly, static. That is to say that the test writers are pretty good at writing the same test over and over and over, but it's different material, obviously. You're not getting the same questions that you saw last term or the term before that. So what if one set of questions were a little bit easier, by which we could only mean that more people got more of those questions right? Or what if one test had a set of questions that was just a little more difficult? More people missed more questions. That's where the scaling comes in. If a test were easier, then more people would get more questions right, and they would be correspondingly slightly less rewarded for those questions. If a test were harder and more people were missing more questions, getting fewer questions right, people would be slightly more heavily rewarded for getting those questions right. So on any given test, to get a 180, you might miss 0 questions or 1 question, or if the test were harder, maybe even 2 or 3 questions and still get a 180. To get a 172, which 172, 173 is kind of the threshold for the 99th percentile. You might miss 10 questions, or if a test were harder, you might be able to miss 13 questions and still get a 172 or 73. And 164 is usually about the 90th percentile. About top 10% of test takers get a 164. To get a 164, you have to answer about 80 questions right, which means that only the top 10% of test takers get a B on this test, 80 out of 100 questions. 152 is usually the median, right around the median, 50th percentile. A score of 140 would put you in about the 13th percentile. You'd score better than 13% of all test takers. Score of 130 puts you in about the 3rd percentile, and 120, of course, is the 0th percentile. 0 people score below that. Law schools are competitive, so what those scores mean is that at the top 14, 15 law schools, they have median LSAT scores for the admitted students that are above the 90th percentile. Median LSAT scores in the 168, 169, 170 range. So we're talking about The median scores at the top law schools being in sort of the 95th to 98th percentile. Half the people they admit above that median. When you get down to the second tier of law schools, then you're talking about LSAT scores that are probably just a little above the national median. So, by the time you're talking about the schools ranked sort of 50th to 60th in the country, you may have median scores at those schools of 158, 159. And then we're talking about sort of 75 to 100 median scores, maybe right around the 152. I think that answers the question of how it's scored and what those scores mean, at least in a very general sense. The LSAT is super important to admissions. I could say that the test is worth 2/3 of the admission decision at most schools, and that would be pretty roughly true. The problem with saying it that way is it kind of gives you the visual of some kind of pie chart, where the LSAT is occupying most of the chart. And that's not entirely an accurate way of thinking about it. A better way of thinking about the LSAT and the role of admissions is when we consider all the parts of the admissions together as a series of hurdles. That's the picture I think would be a little more accurate. And the LSAT's the first hurdle, and it's the high one. So say you want to apply to School X, and School X has a median LSAT score for admitted students of, we'll say, 164. So they're admitting students at the median who are in the 90th percentile of all test takers. And you have a 165 on the LSAT. Congratulations, that is awesome. That means that you are in the mix. It does not mean you're going to be admitted at School X. I mean, you've scraped over the median LSAT score, but you know what? So have thousands of other test takers. You haven't distinguished yourself. All you've said so far with that LSAT score is that, hey, I deserve to be talked about. I deserve at least a chance. You have a 136. You're not in the conversation at School X. All right, but you don't. You have the 160, what do I say? 165, I think is what I said. So you're now in the mix. But now, the most important thing in the world isn't your LSAT score anymore. Now it's your grades. And let's say School X has a GPA, median GPA for admitted students of 3.6. Probably close to what the GPA is at a school with a median LSAT of 164. 3.6. And you have a 3.65. Huzzah! You continue to be in the mix. And yet still you haven't separated yourself from your peers because you're in there, but so are, again, still thousands of other applicants. And they're all applying to those top law schools. All right, so now you've cleared that first hurdle of the LSAT, you've cleared that second hurdle of the GPA. The next thing, and now this becomes the most important thing in the world, is your personal statement. And here's what I mean when I say it's the most important thing in the world. If you write a shitty personal statement, you're not distinguishing yourself. You are. You're distinguishing yourself in the wrong way. You are saying, I am not a good writer. I am not a clear thinker. I am not a great communicator. Don't admit me to your law school. Right? So when I say it's the most important thing, what I mean is you've got to get over that hurdle. If you don't, well, the journey stops right there for you. But let's say you take my advice. I've got a bunch of free advice on the website for how to start your personal statement. And then maybe you get even more involved and you hire somebody really good like me to help you craft your personal statement, and you write something really brilliant. Congratulations. Now you've finally started to distinguish yourself. But again, of the thousands of people with 164 or better on the test who are all applying to this competitive law school, of the thousands of people who have 3.6 GPAs or better, all applying to this law school. You've winnowed it down to maybe a few hundred who wrote really excellent personal statements. But we can't admit them all. So now, the most important thing in the world are your letters of recommendation. Do they show that your professors and the people you've worked with know you, respect you, admire you, recommend you? And at that point, if you've got all of those factors, you probably have gotten in at the school you wanted to go to. Other things that will be taken into consideration are your resume, which you'll have to submit and which needs to be an academic resume, not a work resume. You're applying for admission to the academy. You want to go to school, so your resume needs to show that you're going to be good at school. And then your diversity statement, and you should probably write one. There is some way in which you bring something different to the school. Highlight that in your diversity statement. Your addenda, every law school application, I think without exception, allows for you to add additional material that isn't already covered in the rest of your application. The main point of the addendum is that you had a bad LSAT score compared to like your GPA and your writing ability as evidenced in your personal statement. That's the main point. Or maybe the other way, that you had a bad GPA relative to your superior LSAT score and superior writing talent. The addendum is a place for you to talk about anything that you need to bring to the attention of the admission committee that isn't already covered. So it's not a place for you to try to make excuses. Admissions officers have great bullshit detectors, but it is a place for you to offer real explanations. You know, if your mom died in your freshman year of college, that is a very real reason that you had awful grades for your first 2 years or maybe your whole college career, right? If your dog died, probably not so much. All right, so that's the series of hurdles. Those are the parts of the application, and that should give you a sense of how the LSAT figures into the application or the admission decision and its import. It is the most important. It is not the only thing that matters. Let's talk about the logical reasoning section in just a little more detail. There's going to be 25 or 26 questions in every logical reasoning section. Most tests nowadays have had one section that has 25 and another that has 26. I will divide those 25 or 26 questions into 3 super categories. Questions that ask you to identify things from within the arguments that you've read, questions that ask you to analyze the arguments that you've read, and questions that ask you to describe the arguments that you've read. That first super category or class of questions, identification questions, I'm talking about questions like the main conclusion question. Which of the following is the main conclusion of the argument? Or what I refer to as inference question. What can be properly inferred based on the above? What must be true? What is most strongly supported? All those questions asking the same basic thing. What I refer to as point of disagreement questions, or recently, point of agreement questions. Which of the following is a point at issue between the two speakers? The two speakers, and you've got 2 speakers, obviously, are committed to disagreeing about which of the following, or the 2 speakers are committed to agreeing about which of the following. And you see in all of those instances that I mentioned, your main job is simply to identify from within the passage some information that is already there. That second class of questions, the analysis questions, those questions are asking you to do more than simply identify. You may ask to dig in. You're going to be asked to identify the flaw of an argument. Well, I mean, I said it's identification, but in order to identify what's wrong, you've got to analyze the argument. The bulk of the work that I do in my course is teaching you to stop doing analysis in favor of recognition. What I'm saying is we can do our work in pattern intelligent ways that will allow us, instead of having to think through every single question, to see and to recognize right answers as things that we have seen before. It is seeing things rather than thinking through things. Flaws. You'll be asked for the necessary assumption of an argument, something that the argument needs but does not have. You'll be asked for what I call sufficient assumption, things that the argument doesn't have that if the argument did have would be sufficient to prove that the conclusion is true. You'll be asked to weaken arguments, to strengthen arguments. You'll be asked to evaluate arguments, a piece of information that if true would help you decide whether it's a good argument or bad argument. You'll be asked to resolve apparent discrepancies. All of these tasks ask you to do more than just see what's on the page, to do some analysis. And again, this is the work that I can help you shortcut the most. Finally, that third supercategory or class of questions, what I call description questions, just asking you to describe what you've read. And these include what I refer to as method questions. What is the method of reasoning? Well, this is how the argument went. Let me describe it for you. What I call role questions. What is the function of statement X within the argument? And again, you're describing how that statement fits within the argument. Or what I refer to as parallel questions, which are the following arguments adheres to the same logical structure as the argument you just read. Those questions are just the exact same as method questions. What is the method of reasoning? How did the argument that you just read go? Except instead of finding an answer that just says how it went, you find an answer that also exemplifies that same logical structure. So those are the kinds of questions that you're asked in the logical reasoning section, and for each of them, we can develop expectations because as a standardized test, it's the same, and we can use that sameness to our advantage. Let's take a look at a sample logical reasoning question together. And there are two things that I want you to learn in this short part of the video. First, the logical reasoning section is ordered very roughly in increasing order of difficulty. That is, question 1 is not necessarily easier than question 2, easier than question 3, but questions 1 through 6 taken together are going to be easier as a group than questions 22 through 26. And there is a very rough increasing order of difficulty, and we talk more about that and how to exploit that in the class. But I just want you to keep that in mind because we're going to look at a question 22. To do this, you're going to need a test question. So if you go to this link, you can download a free, full, actual, previously administered LSAT. And if you get it now, pause, I'll wait for you, then you open it up to the first logical reasoning section, and I want to look at question 22. Question 22 should be a more difficult question. After all, it's in that last part of the test, which should be among the most difficult questions on the test. And yet, I'm going to teach you a small bit of technique that will help make some of these questions easier, maybe even easy. Question 22, which of the following is most strongly supported by the editorialist's statements, is an example of what I refer to as the inference question, is asking us what we can infer, what can we prove based on the passage. So, once again, you may want to hit pause and read the passage carefully. I didn't even bother reading it, and here's why. The big picture that I want you to take from this little lesson is the nature of the right answer to the inference question, and that is this. The question has asked us what we can prove, and the passage has given us, 7 lines of text? How likely is it that we can prove in 7 lines that all people hold these beliefs? How likely can we prove in 7 lines of text that every cinnamon roll tastes like? It's not likely. In order to prove something about all people or every cinnamon roll, am I hungry? Maybe. Or maybe cinnamon rolls are just delicious. In order to prove such a broad, sweeping claim, you would need a lot of evidence, right? It would be difficult to prove that all people or every cinnamon roll exists in some fashion. However, it would be very, very easy to prove that at least some people think this way. That at least some cinnamon rolls, that some automobiles, that some monkeys. It'd be very easy. All you'd have to do is just give me one example, and you've proved that it happens at least sometimes, right? On that basis, just with that thought in mind, let's take a look at these answer choices. A, particular acts of resident participation would be likely to elicit a positive response if those politicians were less isolated. How can you show what would happen if some other thing were happening? Is it possible to prove such a thing? Yes. Is it likely? It's not likely. Not in the very few lines of text we've been given. Remember, I haven't even read this passage. Answer choice B. So, I want to be super clear what we're doing. Answer choice A, I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's impossible to be the right answer. What I am saying, and I hope I'm saying it very clearly, is that it is unlikely. Answer choice B. Local political business should be conducted less secretively because it should be? Really? You're going to tell me how we ought to do things? You are going to prove to me how we should operate? Can you prove what we should do? How would you prove such a thing? Is it possible? Yeah. Is it likely? No. It would be difficult to prove to me what people should do. Answer choice C, the most important factor. Really? You're going to prove to me in those 6 or 7 lines of text what the most important factor out of all the possible factors in the world, you're going to prove to me what the most important one is? Could you do that? Yeah. How would you do that? By saying it, right? I mean, you have to just say it. The most important factor is. How likely is it that we've proved the most important factor? It's not likely. We've got a few lines of text there. That's a big thing to try to nail down. It's not likely that we did. Answer choice D. More frequent thorough coverage of local politics would reduce at least one source of discouragement. I'm in love with this answer. I'd like to marry it. I could take it to Vegas. If I had a ring, get more physical with it. How difficult would it be to prove that it would reduce at least one source? Not very difficult. Give me an example of one source of, what is it? One source of discouragement. Give me an example of one source of discouragement, and I've proved it. Do you see what I'm saying? You see the difference between D structurally and A and B and C? It could be tough to prove D if D said that more frequent thorough coverage would reduce discouragement. It'd be hard. Like, how are you going to prove how it reduces it overall? You'd have to know how much discouragement was, how many different sources there were. You'd have to have a way of measuring the amount of net discouragement. But to say that it would reduce at least one source, pretty straightforward. Pretty easy to do in just a few lines of text. Contrast all that against E. If resident participation were not discouraged, this would cause politicians to be less. Again, as with A, how are you going to prove what would happen if some other thing weren't happening or some other thing were happening? It's not that it's impossible, it's just that it is less likely. So we have, based on solid foundational principles of logic, the basic idea that the right answer to a question that asks you what you can infer or what is most strongly supported is likely to be small. It's likely to be limited. And based on that principle, we're able to apply some of that pattern intelligence I was talking about before and say that the right answer to question 22 is most likely D. And we're doing that without even having read the passage. Let's take a bit of a closer look at the reading comprehension. In order to do that, you're going to need a test if you didn't do this with the logical reasoning. If you go to this link, you can download the full text of one previously administered LSAT. I call it Prep Test 51.5 because it was unnumbered. It came in between 51 and 52. It's the June test from 2007. So go ahead and download that. You can hit pause here. I'll wait for you. All right, now open that up to the reading comprehension section and look at the AB passage set. This is the second set of questions, so I'm questions 9 through 14. I don't want to go through the whole thing here. There are complete, I didn't mention this earlier. There are complete explanations of every right answer for every question from every test from 29, Prep Test 29 through 30, 31, 32, all the way through the most recent test. And those are all available for free. You don't have to log in. You don't have to do anything. You just go watch them. And you can do that by starting at velocitylsat.com/resources, I think. But it won't take you many clicks to find this enormous library of free explanations. So I don't want to do the whole thing. But what I do want to do is I'll have you hit pause and just read those two passages, passage A and passage B. All right. I want to answer question 9 together. I want to talk about how I'm going to answer a question. So here's one part of the technique that I'll teach you in the course of the paid course. In the course of the course, over the duration of the course, in the ebb and flow of the course, in the natural progression of the course. Other ways I could have said that without using the same word twice. Both passages were written primarily in order to answer which one of the following questions. Here's what I want to do. Those answer choices are right there. They're looking at you in the face. They seem to be winking at you. They've got a sort of come hither look on their faces. They desperately, desperately want you to come and read them and think about them and waste time considering them. Don't do that. Instead, we'll answer the question. It's a question. It's got an answer. It doesn't depend on these 5 choices. It's got an answer, an actual answer that we can find based in the text. Both passages were written in order to answer which of the following questions. If this were an open book, free response question, you wouldn't have any problem with it. You'd look at the 2 passages, got an open book, you'd write in the response, and you'd get it right because it's not that hard of a question. Passage A, did music and human language originate separately or together? What are we talking about? From the very first sentence, we're talking about the origins of either language or music, right? Or both. And the rest of the passage goes on to talk about the origin, the evolutionary origin of music. At the end of the passage, we have an answer. Music, it would seem, had little adaptive value of its own, and most likely developed on the coattails of language. How did music originate in humans? That's what the first passage is talking about. Passage 2, Darwin claimed, we're talking about evolution. How much you want to bet we're talking about the evolution of music? Since neither the enjoyment nor the capacity of producing musical notes are faculties of the least use to man, they must be ranked among the most mysterious with which he is endowed. By the end of the last paragraph, the author makes it super plain. Here's what I'm asking. Line 50. What evolutionary advantage would such behavior have? What are we concerned with in passage A? The evolutionary origins of music. In passage B, the evolutionary origins of music. Question 9, what question are we answering? How did music evolve in humans? What evolutionary advantage did larger brain size? Why do human mothers and infants engage in bonding behavior? What are the evolutionary origins of the human ability to make music? My voice weren't giving out on me. That would have been the sound of angels singing, declaring to you that we have reached the right answer. And we know it's the right answer because we've already answered the question. We saw that answer in the text. So let this be lesson 1. Don't be beholden to these answer choices. Instead, develop your answers based on the text in front of you. Turn this multiple choice test into a free response test. You'll do better that way. Let's take a closer look at the game section of the test, and we'll do that by use of an example. If you haven't already, hit up this link, and you can download the full text of a previously administered LSAT. That's Prep Test 51.5. It was unnumbered between 51, 52. It's a June test of 2007, and you can get the whole thing at that link. So go ahead and hit pause. Get that, come back, wait for you. Okay, you're back. Open up to the game section and look at the first game in the section. Let's talk about this game together. The first thing that I'm doing every time I see a game is I have developed a series of precisely five organizational templates. The first thing I'm doing when I look at a game is I'm asking myself, which organizational template that I've already developed could I use to organize the material in this game? Because what I want to do with every game is to make it visual on the page. I want to use my pencil. In this first game, I can see that I'm putting these codes together, and so that looks like an order, right? I mean, I got 5 digits, and I need to determine what order those digits appear in. So I will use what I'll refer to as my standard ordering template. I'll put this on the whiteboard. There. Now you can see I've got an organizational template into which I can fit these product codes. I've got 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and they're going to go in some order, and I'm going to put 1 number in each column. And then I've got rules. The codes use the digits 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right, fine, got it. Each digit occurs exactly once. Okay, fine. Let's make sure we've got that. That just means we're not repeating any digits. Our code is not 0, 0, 0, 0. It may be 0, 3, 2, 4, 1. It may be 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. It may be, any order. Oh, I won't list all the orders. But we're not repeating. We're going to use all 5 of them. The second digit has a value exactly twice that of the first digit. Let's take that sort of abstract mathematical idea and make it concrete. The second digit is twice that of the first digit. So if the first digit were 0, the second digit would be 0, right? And we're not repeating any, so the first digit can't be 0. If the first digit were 1, the second digit would be 2. If the first digit were 2, the second digit would be 4. If the first digit were 3, the second digit would be 6. We don't have a 6. So every single code we create based on rule 3 is going to start by saying 1, 2, and then something, 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 or 2, 4, and then something, something, something. Take something abstract, make it concrete, make it visual, so you can see it instead of thinking about it. Finally, the value of the third digit is less than the value of the 5th digit. This one is smaller than this one. Well, all right, let's think about what we've got left. In our 1, 2, we've got 0, 3, and 4 left. So this one's smaller, it can't be 4. 4 is not smaller than 0 or 3. It's smaller, it can't be 4. It's 0 or 3. And this one is bigger than that one. So this one can't be 0. 0 is not bigger than anything. This one is 3 or 4. And then this could be anything, right? And we could put a 3 and a 4 and a 0. We could put a 0 and a 4 and a 3. See what I'm saying? I'm making this more concrete. All right, what if we had a code that started with 2 and 4? Well, then we have 1 and 3 and 0. And 0 left. That was very tidy. And the same principle applies. This one, the third digit, is smaller, so it's not a 3. 3 is not smaller than anything. It's 0 or 1. This 5th digit is bigger. It's not a 0. It's 1 or 3. And all I've done here is use an organizational template and then render my abstract rules graphically, visually. This is sort of Games Lesson 1. Let's answer the questions. I'll just take them in order. There is a particular order I usually adopt when I'm dealing with games questions. We'll get into that in the course. Question number 1, if the last digit of an acceptable code is 1, if the last digit of an acceptable code is 1, then that tells me we're not talking about this option. The first digit isn't 1. So the last digit is 1, the first digit must be a 2, and then a 4. And then the fourth rule told me that this one is bigger, so this is not 1. Or think about it this way. We know that this one is either 0 or 1, and now we've used a 1. It's not 1, it's 0. And that leaves a 3 here. If the last digit is 1, it must be true that A, the first digit, is 2. Wow, we did a lot more work than we needed to. All right, question 2. What must be true about any acceptable product code? Let's see. Answer choice A, the digit 1 appears before the digit 2. No, that doesn't have to be true. I mean, here the digit 1 is after the 2. B, 1 is before the 3. No, that doesn't have to be true. 1 can be after the... I've already shown that 1 can be after the 3. It doesn't have to be before it. C, the digit 2 appears before the digit 3. We had only 2 starting positions, right? We start like this, or we start like this. If we start like this, the 2 is before the 3. If we start like this, the 2 is before the 3. No matter what we do in every single acceptable code, the 2 is before the 3. That must be true. Question 3. If the third digit of an acceptable product code is not 0, well, that leaves us 2 options. If it's not 0, it might be 3, or it might be 1. I'm going to show both of those options. It might be 3, or it might be 1. If it's 3, we're talking about this top option. That's a 1, that's a 2. 3 is used up. This must be 4, which is another way of saying this one has to be bigger than this one. So there's a 0. We said the third digit was not 0, so it's either 3 or it's 1. If it's 1, then we're talking about the 2, 4 option. This one has to be bigger than this one, or say it this way, we've used up the 1, this has to be the 3, this has to be the 0. We were asked if that third digit isn't 0, what has to be true? A, the second digit is 2, could be, doesn't have to be. The third digit is 3, could be, doesn't have to be. C, the fourth digit is 0. Yeah, either way, the fourth digit is 0. Question 4, any of the following pairs could be the third and fourth digits, respectively. So a pair of digits that could be these two in order, except. Could we do 0 and 1? I don't see why not. I mean, actually, I'm going to leave my answer at that. I don't see why not. I'm not saying it could be. I'm just saying I don't see why it couldn't be. 0 and 3. As a matter of fact, I have already seen that that can be. Like, I've seen it happen. 0 and 3. I'm going to put a check by that. It could be. It is acceptable. And remember, the right answer here is something that is not acceptable. Answer choice C, 1 and 0. Yeah, I've seen that. I know that that is acceptable. Answer choice D, 3 and 0. Yeah, I've seen it. I know that that is acceptable. Did I? Yeah. A, B. Okay, A I didn't know about. B, C, and D I've already seen. Answer choice E, 3 and 4. That's not acceptable. But I don't have to see that it's not acceptable. I can just do the work. I left answer choice A. I've got answer choice E. Is A acceptable? 0 and 1. Well, if we're doing 0 and 1, we're clearly not talking about this guy. Because, you know, the 1 is first here. So we're talking about this guy. 2 and 4 and 3 is left. And yeah, we can totally do that. 3 is bigger than 0. 4 is twice 2. That works. Contrast that against answer choice E, which must be our answer because it must not work. 3 and 4. Okay, if I'm using the 4 here, I'm not talking about this guy. I must be talking about this one. 1, 2, and that means this is a 0. And uh-oh. This one had to be bigger than this one. 0 is not bigger than 3, so this is unacceptable. 3 and 4 is not a working set for the third and fourth digits. And that means that it's our answer. That leaves us with only question 5. What must be true about any acceptable product code? Let's see. A, there's exactly 1 digit between 0 and 1. No, that doesn't have to be true. You could have no digits at all between 0 and 1. B, there's exactly 1 digit between 1 and 2. No, that doesn't have to be true. You could have no digits at all between 1 and 2. B doesn't have to be true. C, there are at most 2 digits between the 1 and the 3. Could you have more than 2 digits between the 1 and the 3? I don't know. I don't have more than 2 here. I don't have more than 2 here. I don't have more than 2 here or here. Maybe I can't get them any farther apart than 2 digits. Maybe that must be true. I'll hold on to it. D, there are at most 2 digits between the 2 and the 3. Well, that's false. Here I've got 3 digits between the 2 and the 3. I can have more than 2. Answer choice D doesn't have to be true. Answer choice E, there are at most 2 digits between the 2 and the 4. At most 2. Here there's no more than 2. Here there's no more than 2. Here there's no... Okay. So far, answer choice C has been true. Answer choice E has been true. One of them has to be true and the other one doesn't. Answer choice C, let's try it out. There are at most 2 digits between the 1 and the 3. If you're going to do more than 2 digits between them, you have to put them at far end, right? That's how you get 3 digits between them. Well, that would have to be a 2. This would have to be a 0. And then this would be our 4. And 3 is bigger than 0. This works. It doesn't violate any rules. So that means it's not the case that there are at most 2 in between them. I can get up to 3 in between them. C is not my answer. Answer choice E, on the other hand, there are at most 2 digits between the 2 and the 4. Look, if we're doing it like this, then you've got 0 digits between them. The only other option is to do it like this, in which case there are at most 2 digits between the 2 and the 4. Yeah, every single iteration, there are at the very most 2 digits between the 2 and the 4. That must be true. That's our answer. And that is this game. And that is your introduction to games. So, how can I help you on the test? Well, there's lots of free help at the website, including explanations for every right answer from every question from every test, from prep test 29 through 30, 31, 32, and on and on and on through the most recent tests. And that's just free. I mean, you don't even have to log in. You just click on a video and start watching. That's helpful. You know, it's helpful for those times when you're studying on your own and you just don't understand why B is the right answer. Then there's advice on how to write your personal statement, how to write your diversity statement, how to write the LSAT writing sample, which again, you're not going to worry too much about, but you know that you've got that advice there. There's the podcast, which you should listen to. Just search LSAT Kung Fu in Apple Podcasts. And the blog, which has mostly nowadays just an ongoing thinking about my law school experience. There's also folded in occasional LSAT prep, and earlier on in the days of the blog, there's some useful LSAT prep there. So that's the free help that I can offer you. If you want more than that, if you want more help, deeper help, better help, then we've got the paid course. And what I can do for you there is show you the things that I've learned over my decade plus of experience with this test. The things that I learned that helped me to earn 3 perfect scores on the test, 6 other scores in the 99th percentile. I may not know much, but I do know the LSAT. And what I know about it is that it is a standardized test, and it is the same, and we can use that sameness to our advantage. We will learn together to view the question in front of us as having a common DNA with all the questions that came before it and with all the questions that are going to come in the future, so that we take the experience that we're practicing on right now, and we turn that into a way of predicting what we'll see when test day comes, so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel with every question we answer. Instead, we can recognize answer choices as being right by structure. We can recognize arguments by structure. We can see instead of think. We can do that in the game section, we can do it in the reading comp, and we can do it in the logical reasoning. And if we can do it in all of those places, well, then that's our test. And that's what I'll do in the video lessons. I'll give you the theory that underlies every kind of question. I'll give you my experienced What was I going to say? I don't know. I can give you my experience. Oh, my experienced and pattern intelligent opinion. That's what I was going to say. So that you have a lens for seeing these questions as just parts of a bigger whole, a whole that you have seen before. If that sounds good to you, then hit that enroll button and join the team. And if not, hey, use those free videos. I would much rather you listen to me explain for free why the right answer is right than pay some jackass to do that for you. Questions? Hit me up. I've got a contact link on the website. My email is dave@velocitylsat.com, and I am here to help. All right, thanks.